the Audit Committee meeting. We've apologies from one of our external auditors, Emily Main. Other than Emily, everyone who is a member of the committee is with us. A particular welcome today to those who are with us for the first time. So we have a new independent member of the committee. He was with us for the paper meeting that happened in March, but a warm welcome to Richard Holland, who's joined us as an independent member of the committee. And congratulations on her appointment as DCC, and a welcome to the committee to Vanessa Jardine, who again is with us for the first time. We do regard it as really important that we've got senior uniformed presence at the Audit Committee meetings. That's proved incredibly helpful since that was initiated. So we're delighted to have DCC Jardine with us. So we'll begin the meeting by me just asking, first of all, that in terms of the protocol, everyone stays on mute unless they are speaking. That if you wish to speak, you use the raised hand device, which I should be able to see. If you think I haven't spotted you, you could use the chat line to alert me in that way. Are there any declarations of interest that any members of the committee need to declare in any item on the agenda? I can't see any hands raised and I can't see anything coming up, so thank you for that. We have not effectively minutes of the last meeting, because the last meeting was scheduled in, I think, what was the first week after lockdown happened. Nobody at that stage had yet quite worked out how we would hold virtual committee meetings, so it was a paper exercise. Members did contribute thoughts and comments and questions, and all of those are set out in the papers. I think we'll take them as read because that was a long time ago, but unless anyone has any particular thing that they want to pick up, I don't think it's properly answered there. I don't think there is anything. Okay, there are no matters arising that we would have been expecting to pick up the work on value for money profiles, but in the light of the lockdown and everyone's very hard work in dealing with that emergency, that work has not progressed, so we will expect to see that at a future meeting. There is one item that I wish to report to the board that was reported to me during the lockdown, which concerns a breach of the corporate governance framework, which happened at a time when all public bodies were desperately seeking to obtain personal protective equipment for their staff. And in relation to that, there was a significant purchase of PPE made at the request of the Home Office and on behalf of a number of forces, but without prior approval of the Commissioner, which should have been required under the corporate governance framework. That was reported, it was dealt with appropriately. Retrospective permission was given, but it was quite rightly then reported to me as chair of the Audit Committee. And for openness, I think it's important that the Audit Committee itself is aware that that happened, that has been recorded, but there was no intention on anyone's part to breach, to mislead anyone, and no question of misconduct. Although I gather that it has led us into negotiations with the Home Office on who ought to be paying. And so it would be helpful if either Mark or Jardine were able to update us on whether the cost of that equipment, which was very substantial, is still a matter of negotiation or whether it's been settled.
If I can come in here, Chair. It hasn't been settled yet. We've had verbal promises that we will receive the money back, along with other forces who are in a similar position to us. So we're something that we have lobbied the Home Office for and the Policing Minister. And we will go on to this later, but we have to complete a return on a monthly basis now, which sets out how much money we spent on COVID, and it is included in that submission to the Home Office. So we're hoping to get it shortly.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Mark. So no doubt that will, if it remains an issue in which we're in dispute, no doubt it will come back to the Audit Committee at some future point, just in terms of the financial position. Neil, did you want to comment on this?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just in terms of context, really. So obviously it was at a time when West Midlands Police had secured enough PPE for its own officers, but there was a national shortage for UK policing. We were approached by the Home Office and their representatives, and other forces had already made purchases on national UK policing's behalf. I sort of made that decision. I had to document every the approach that happened, the timing, and everything that went around that. Sought assurances from the Home Office that either there would be no financial risk to the force, but equally we would have no liability for any type of over-ordering or surplus stock. So I was given the assurance that that would be granted. Obviously, the next day I briefed Mark as CFO for the PCC, and then the order was placed the following day. And obviously, the speediness of the decision that was made, I felt we did the right thing at the right time for UK policing, and obviously we briefed the PCC as soon as physically possible. So I just wanted to apply a bit of context, really.
Thank you very much for that, Neil. And I am certainly aware what a critical issue the supply of that equipment was for all public bodies who got people still in touch with the general. So completely understood how that might have happened and why. And I don't think there was any question but that it was an appropriate thing to do. But the I's hadn't been dotted and the T's crossed, and it's right that we're aware of that. There are no further hands up in relation to that item. So I will move on to the appointment of a vice chair at item 5. We've not had a vice chair to the committee since our previous independent member left us, but it is useful always to have someone who is designated vice chair. And the appropriate, since we must have an independent person at every meeting, if I'm not there, it's the most appropriate person to chair it is the other independent member. I've asked Richard whether he'd be willing to do that, and he has confirmed that he is. So I would like to propose that we appoint Richard as the vice chair. Is everyone content with that? I'm working on nods because we haven't worked out whether that little button is a yes in the chat line is a yes, but I'm seeing nods. Thank you very much to the members. And we'll try not to overtax you, Richard, with the role, but it's very useful to have someone else there. So that brings us to item 6, to the annual governance statements. Just as a reminder to the officers, given that we are attempting to meet the guidelines that we shouldn't be in front of the screen for more than 2 hours, we're hoping to get through the business in an efficient manner. So please expect that all members have thoroughly read the documents and draw our attention to the particular issues, any particular issues that you want us to discuss, or anything that's changed since the reports were circulated, please. Mark, are you going to kick off?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I'll be very brief because this is all set out in the document in front of you. Just want to make it clear in terms of a process issue. Both of these statements have been prepared sort of separately. So the forces prepared their own, and we in the PCC's office have prepared our own AGS as well. And I know Devindra will come in after me to talk about the forces. But in relation to the PCC's annual governance statement, it sets out clearly sort of the significant governance issues that the PCC currently faces. And one of them, as you'd expect, is COVID and how that's been managed from a governance point of view in the West Midlands policing environment, setting out that an emergency chapter has been produced of the policing crime plan, covering 4 objectives, which is set out in the report. It also covers in the AGS other significant issues, some of them around the internal audits work in terms of their findings over the last year. And also another significant governance issue is obviously holding the Chief Constable to account in terms of those areas that have witnessed sort of significant funding reductions in years gone by, particularly around sort of holding to account around performance. The statement then talks about the review of effectiveness that has been undertaken to actually complete the annual governance statement. And as in past years, we've completed a mapping exercise showing how the PCC complies with SITF's 7 principles that are set out in the governance statement. The statement also talks about as well the issues that were raised in previous years and how they've been dealt with over the last financial year. Some of those relating to GDPR and the change programme across the force as well. So that's a summary. And I'm sure Devinder would like to come in now and talk about the forces AGS.
Hello. Yes. So with regard to the force AGS, I mean, as you've said, Chair, I'm assuming that it's been read, so I won't cover sort of the content of it. It has been prepared in line with the SITFA framework. We do seek to try and build up on sort of previous year's statements. Specific to this year, we have had some staff changes, and our governance manager has left the force. However, we have appointed a new head of strategy and direction who will lead on the governance statement going forwards. The statement is subject to review as part of the external audit. And I suppose just in terms of drawing anything specific out, with regards to COVID, we were required to put in a specific disclosure around that this year. Business as usual governance largely continued. Some governance boards were paused for a short period of time, but they have now been reinstated. And obviously during the sort of the key critical period of governance, there were some new governance arrangements in place to deal with the COVID situation. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you both very much. So are there questions or comments then from members? Richard, I can see, has raised his hand. Richard.
Yeah, no, thank you for the document, both. I thought it was really thorough. My observation, I think, reading from a fresh pair of eyes, was there's a lot of emphasis on the process and description of how things are done, but not so much on terms of kind of the evaluation of those arrangements and the outcomes and effectiveness of them. I just wondered whether, following the SITFA guidance, you had a steer in terms of what the appropriate content should be.
Does one of you want to pick that up?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Richard. As I set out, we've done a sort of an evaluation in support of this AGS, sort of setting out how the Commissioner's governance arrangements comply with the 7 principles across each of the principles, and in terms of what you'd expect in terms of those principles and how it actually complies with it. It's something that I'm quite happy to share with committee as a supplementary document after this meeting. That's helpful.
Yes, that might be helpful. Thank you, Mark. Gurinder's also got his hand up. My screen says 2 other people have, and I can only see Gurinder, but I'll call Gurinder and then see if I can work out who else it is.
Thank you, Chair. My question was, so obviously we're in the middle of coming out of the COVID stuff, and both of the reports indicate changes that were made for the short term in regards to COVID. But in the event that the situation doesn't improve dramatically to allow operational normal status to be returned, what plans are both the Force and the Police and Crime Officers Office making to review governance, and how do you expect it may be changed, and is there an opportunity to look at doing things differently to make things more efficient, for example?
Is that one perhaps for Jonathan, or does Mark want to take it?
I'm quite happy to take it, Chair.
Yeah.
So obviously, as you said, Govind, it's obviously a moving picture all the time around COVID, and something that we did do, as you know, is issue the sort of emergency chapter in the police and crime plan. That's been reviewed on a regular basis because we've got an action plan to support it. I think as things develop further into COVID, it's something that we're looking at all the time in terms of the context of policing governance and what the Commissioner should be doing in terms of that oversight role. You mentioned at the end of your question around sort of becoming more efficient and potentially areas that have worked. I presume by that you mean areas that have particularly worked well under the sort of revised working arrangements. And I know, sort of speaking on behalf of the force, obviously there is groups in place to look at sort of how policing will potentially operate in the future, given the experience of operating under a different arrangement. And something that we're doing in the PCC's office is obviously bearing that in mind in terms of our work as well, about how it will change given the experience we've had of COVID.
Could I come in, Chair, just to add for the force context?
Yes. Thank you.
So to answer the question, we adapted very, very quickly at the beginning of COVID, and as has already been said, some governance boards temporarily stopped, but everything has now been reinstated. But what we have got in addition now is a fully stood up recovery group with a number of different strands in that, one of which is looking at new ways of working and how we take the learning from the last few months and adapt our working practices. So I think my answer would be twofold in that, firstly, I feel that the force is in a really good position if a second wave does affect the West Midlands, so that we now are well practiced and well versed in what our procedures would be, both on a single force perspective, but also on a partnership point of view. And secondly, the recovery board with its different strands is actively engaged and looking at our new ways of working and any potential opportunities for new ways of governance in that process.
Thank you. And Jonathan, you've got your hand raised presumably on this point as well.
But the only comment I would add, Chair, thank you for bringing me in, is the Commissioner has been also considering, along with the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, about the role of PCCs in relation to emergency planning and the recovery arrangements. There is going to be no doubt a national discussion about lessons learned from the oversight of the COVID emergency, and I expect that there will be a submission from PCCs on this point. At the moment, the Commissioner's position is that there could be a role for PCCs in relation to emergency planning, analogous to that they have in relation to the criminal justice system and community safety partners, that they have a duty in relation to securing efficiency and effectiveness. That's based on a perception, whether it's a founded one, but one that will be certainly subject to further debate, that the emergency planning arrangements that are designed necessarily for short-term periods. But what we're seeing in relation to the current pandemic is that these emergency planning arrangements are staying in place for not just weeks, but months and months and months, and may be in place for a very long period of time, and about ensuring what's effective democratic oversight of those for an extended period. Thanks, Chair.
Indeed, thank you for that. Richard, your hand is still up. So had you a second point, or sorry, I didn't check with you whether you were happy with the original answer to your first point.
That's my oversight, Chair. I do apologise. No, my hand is now withdrawn, hopefully. So.
Okay, fine. So is there anyone else then on the governance statements? Okay, so the governance statements are then contained within the statement of accounts, but that's given us an opportunity to look at them in more detail. So we'll move on to the statement of accounts. Devinder, do you want to kick off?
Sorry, Chair.
Sorry.
Mark, yeah, Mark is kicking off this one for us, please.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Chair. So, as we all know, the statement of accounts is a very detailed document, and the report that is with the in front of the committee covers some of the main highlights. So, one of the significant things in terms of the audit this year, in terms of the accounts and the publication of the accounts, is that the deadlines have actually been moved back because of COVID and people's ability to produce accounts within the original deadlines. So the main sort of deadline in terms of the audit of the accounts is the 30th of November this year, as opposed to the 31st of July as it was last year. So the report itself sets out that there was an underspend last year in terms of the PCC's overall expenditure, with the day-to-day expenditure of the force coming in at an underspend of just short of £9 million. It's important to remember, though, that that money will be used to fund future years' budgets and future years' pressures, because the current budget itself, in the terms of this financial year, there was a requirement to find a £10 million gap, which has been met by a number of things, and one of those being the underspend from the old financial year. Something that we always talk about at committee is the pensions liability, which is huge for a force and a PCC like West Midlands. It has actually reduced slightly in the old year to around just under £8 billion, which is mainly due to future predictions around inflation. Another point to draw out as well, the total reserves of the PCC at the end of March are 60 million, and that really is to fund the carry forwards from the current financial year, but also the day-to-day operation of the force in terms of things like the insurance reserve and the general reserve as well. So I understand the external audit started this week, and the accounts themselves make reference to COVID from an operational perspective and a financial perspective. Just as a bit of context, including that national order we talked about earlier, we spent around £11 million on COVID. Well, we forecast that to the end of June, so we're hoping that we'll get most of this back via the government, but as we said earlier, that's yet to be confirmed. And just pointing out as well that in terms of the going concern of the force and the PCC, these accounts are prepared on a going concern basis. A crucial thing for us is the future years financial settlements, and obviously that will probably be impacted on the public sector because of COVID. So we need to wait to see what the outcome is of future budget announcements from the government. But in our opinion as CFOs, myself and Neil's, the force and the PCC is in a sustainable financial position, albeit that we're waiting for future financial settlements for coming financial years. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. And I could see Alex nodding when you said that the audit had started, so I am taking that as confirmation. So, Devinder, did you want to then add something from the point of view of the force?
Not a huge amount. I suppose I'd just like to pick up on the point about the going concern piece. I think that there's probably some concern on the back of COVID, but I suppose I'd like to give the committee reassurance that the code itself remains unchanged. Within our accounts, we don't have a specific heading around going concern, but there is a need for us to report on the impact of the financial pressures, which we have done in the narrative report, which you'll find around page 14 or 15 of the group accounts. And also external audit will also consider the going concern piece as part of the work that they do, which they will specifically report on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just a reminder to everyone when you're speaking to put your cameras back on, so that anyone who's watching the stream can see as well as hear. Are there any questions or comments from members?
You're muted, Chair.
Thank you for the reminder, Corinda. Very easy to do, isn't it? So it doesn't appear that there are any questions from anyone. Clearly, we will return to the accounts once we've got the auditor's opinion. Oh, Richard.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I did have a question about the going concern, but that's been answered more than fully. Thank you. Just the end, because I'm new, the extra funding that's been promised by central government, mainly around kind of increasing numbers of officers. Sometimes when you get extra money, it isn't always in the areas that you need it to be. And I just wonder whether I had a view on that, whether I'm sure you want more officers, but are you being directed into kind of spending money in areas where you have no control over and you would ideally like to spend it somewhere else?
It's a very perceptive question. Neil had his hand up. I'm not sure if it was to answer that. So if he doesn't answer you, we'll see if we can find someone who does. Neil, do you want to come in?
Yeah, shall I try and answer that first, and then I'll make my observation. I shouldn't have put my hand up at that time, should I? Yeah, just in terms of Richard's point, I think it's been really interesting over the last 12 months because obviously as a force we've been lobbying hard to say there should be investment in policing, and increasing officer numbers is a major priority to us. I think it's fair to say, Richard, that the funding that's come for police officer uplift, recognising that there are other spend that is required in terms of increasing those police officers. It's not just about officer salaries. So the work we've done with the Home Office recognises all the on costs, if you like, that go with having more officers in a force. So things like the basics such as uniform, equipment, radios, and also in the areas of things like fleet and accommodation costs. So that's all built into the overall piece, and also recognition that the force in terms of police staff needs to grow as well. So we don't feel in a position that we're we're being forced to spend that uplift money on areas that we wouldn't normally. Obviously, the priority is to get those 1,200 officers into the force, well trained, and being able to serve the members of the public of the West Midlands. But just to answer that question, no, we're fully on track and delivering the police uplift, although it is a challenge. But the money has been directed to where it needs to be spent. The comment that I wanted just to make, Chair, around the statement of accounts is just really to recognise the great work that's been done in the finance team over the last couple of months. Bearing in mind, as Mark said, the impact that COVID has had on our processes and ability to be able to work as a team, and the flexibility that we were given in terms of a lengthened timetable. The team has still been able to pull out the stops and deliver on time, which I'm really, really proud of, and I think we should just acknowledge that.
Thank you, Neil, and I would have done that at the end and will do so just to say, congratulations. I've seen it in other sectors as well, where, the initial response was quite rightly from the centre to say, there's an awful lot to distract people and we will therefore relax some of the timetables that we're expecting. But actually, people have pressed on because it's got to be done at some point. But it's not always easy when everybody is working remotely. And although there have been efficiencies in people working out of big offices, I know that the issue of teams working efficiently together, is one that people raise, and people do miss each other, which is nice to know. Jonathan, I think you wanted to come in as well.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly on Richard's question, there has been an increase in the last 12 months in the number of, perhaps a little bit beyond that as well, 18 months maybe, of short-term ring-fence grants for specific areas of business, and that they are captured in the statement of accounts, but particularly in relation to surge funding into policing. Surge is the jargon term that we've been using for projects to increase the level of capacity in policing to respond to youth violence. That's a separate grant scheme to that which sits in the PCC's office for the Violence Reduction Unit. There have been also grant schemes around the wider use of taser devices as well. So I think from the perception of, from the perspective of the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, there has been an increase in the short-term grant funded sort of one-year annual spend type projects, which pose a number of challenges, both because it is difficult to make the projects that they support sustainable, and also they often come with very tight timescales. So there is a degree of risk associated with both planning for the expenditure and then actually the expenditure itself. You end up with the classic bulge of expenditure in Q4 in order to get the money out the door prior to the end of the financial year, which I think is a bad practice in the public sector generally speaking. So while the uplift fund, which is one of the most high profile elements as reported in the statement of accounts, is welcome, the wider use of short-term grant funding is highly problematic. You know, the most recent example is we received a grant to support small charities in our area just a few days ago at £286,000, and we're given 8 days to tell Home Office how we would spend the money. You know, these sorts of practices, while the funding is welcome and is important for some of the wider objectives of the PCC, the operational implications, both of the force and the PCC's office, are significant.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. Not activity that's restricted to the Home Office, I might say, but frustrating. I think we can all understand why. I don't have any other indications of anyone wanting to come in on the statements of accounts. Just check there's nobody picking anything up at the last minute. In which case we will move on to the internal audit update, and Lynn Joyce, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of updates and observations since I've drafted this report. At the point of writing it, four audits were in draft. We've had 2 of those finalised now, so we're just 2 that we've got in draft that are waiting management comments on. I think members will probably notice that the outstanding recommendations have stagnated a little bit over the last quarter, and what we're seeing as a result of COVID, progress on those has been slower than usual. So Appendix 4 may be a little bit, there may be a few more recommendations in there than we've reported previously, but we're keeping that under control, and we'll still go back every 3 months to monitor the progress on those. But that was inevitable as a result of COVID. Also, you will notice that the performance of the internal audit plan, we didn't achieve the 90% target that we had set. And again, that was as a result of the not being able to finalise some of those audits before the end of the year, because we couldn't get in with the officers that we needed to see to complete the testing and to close out the audit. So we were slightly under target on that planned achievement, but the rest of the targets were achieved. And just the final observations for me were around the DDI Insight Search audit, which is reported at Appendix 1. This audit, you'll probably identify that we've picked up on some issues in terms of record keeping, data cleanse and user acceptance testing. I just wanted to reassure the committee that we have fed those concerns back to the Programme Management Office for lessons learned on future projects. This was those processes were done a couple of years ago, and we have come across them in other projects, and we continue to feed those back to the Programme Office. We have bi-monthly meetings with the Programme Office to feed back any issues that we find on all of our audits, so that they can share good practice across any future projects. Some of the issues that were in the report around address matches and the work ongoing on that, we anticipate they may have been postponed slightly due to the COVID-19 impact, but we'll get follow-up on those hopefully for the next committee. And in terms of the confidence issues that we reported, because some stakeholders were still using the old system, I think that is inevitable with any new system. When you've got a trusted system that you've been used to using for a long time, it does take time for new systems to start to embed. But management are continuing to address those concerns and seek sort of feedback from users of the new Insight Search. And they're building any of those concerns into a log to address issues in a consolidated way. And they are planning to run challenges and workshops with users. It's just that some of those exercises have been slightly delayed as a result of COVID. But we are assured that management are taking those concerns seriously and they've put proper action plans in place. So that's all I wanted to say about that report, and happy to answer any questions.
Okay, well, if we pick up where you finished, I know Kathy had some issues around the data cleansing issue. Has Lynn answered anything you want to ask, Kathy, or do you want to come in on that now?
Yes, if I could come in on that, Chair, it was just really, Lynn, to understand the practical implications of that. So if you take the gazetteer, if the force can't find the address, you know, how can they make a response to incidents there? So that's the first question, to get some reassurance around police action. And also for the matching and merging, what the consequences of that are, either in respect of officers searching records or having a reasonable and accurate understanding of what those records mean.
That sounds as though that might be a question for Vanessa.
I was going to say that might be a question that we need to divert to the force. I know in terms of the address matches, there's a lot of exercises going on, and Dean Sweet's managing that exercise across it. They initially started with Oasis, and they've done a lot of data cleanse on the information from Oasis as part of the Control Works project. And there was an exercise planned during June to roll that out to all of the other systems that have been ingested into Insight Search. To make that data accurate. So that exercise is still ongoing at the moment, but I anticipate that there may have been some delays as a result of COVID. But there's a lot of exercises to get that user consultation feedback to improve the system, but ACC Jardine may be able to give more information about what that involves.
Yeah, thank you, Lynn. Thanks, Chair. So in terms of the data-driven insight, we discussed it actually as a force executive team just on Tuesday this week, and we recognise there are areas, as Lynn has quite rightly articulated, that need to be progressed. We have still got the other system, our Flint system, up and running at the moment, and that kind of is a positive and a negative. So it's a positive in terms of it's a system that people know well, it's a system that has been in operation for a while, it's a system that people are familiar with and therefore are happy to use. So there is a sort of, you know, a stopgap, a sort of, you know, a place where a backstop, sorry, of information that's there. But of course, we've invested in the DDI, and that's where we want to go. It's much better technology, you know, it's more intuitive, but we recognise there are some issues and risks with it at the moment, which are being addressed. And the match and merge and duplication exercise, you know, is a key part of that around duplicate records. So there's something about transitioning across, but only when we are entirely comfortable that we are not creating risk in the system. But until we are in an ability to switch Flints off, and that user rate of DDI is going to lag behind, because I think it's just natural sort of, you know, human nature that we use what we like to use and what we're familiar with. But actually we want to transition people across to the DDI system because it is a much better system. So we had a full update this week in the Force Executive team. There is a very clear plan around how we are addressing the issues and how we want to move in the future with some further investment into the DDI, so we can make it operational into the system that we know it can be, but as it's performing as it should. And there are a few glitches at the moment that we need to just unpick and resolve.
Thank you for that. Could we just concentrate a moment on the gazetteer and the missing addresses? I'm sure the public would like some reassurance that even if their address is not on the system, that they will still get the police response that's required for whatever incident is occurring at that address.
So, of course, we will respond to all emergencies, you know, in the appropriate manner. I must apologise, Catherine, I would need to find out the level of concern around the gazetteer. It's just, you know, my lack of knowledge at this moment in time around the extent of that. But we would never not deploy to an incident and would find the nearest available premises so that we can deploy and make sure that we keep people safe. So I can reassure in terms of our response, but in terms of my personal understanding of that issue around the gazetteer, I have to take that away, please, and just look at that so I can give you the fullest answer.
That's fine. It would. I'd be grateful just to have some additional reassurance around that. Thank you.
Thank you. And if that could be circulated to everyone so that we can all see that. So, Richard, you want to come in?
Yeah, I think it was a more of a general point, probably to Lynn, I guess, in terms of what she's seeing across the piece. So the Appendix 1 in that report talks about kind of fairly standard project change and change project issues such as stakeholder comms, user acceptance testing, benefit realization. And I'm mindful of Lynn's comment about that was fed back into the project office with a kind of lessons learned label to it. Just what's her observation of her and her team in terms of how change projects are managed generally? Do those sorts of things come up as kind of common issues and challenges?
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, I think in the last couple of projects we've been involved in, we are seeing a vast improvement in the project controls. I think some of these observations that we've made in DDI were certainly replicated in earlier projects, and DDI, we have to remember, started in 2016-17 and it has sort of developed in phases since then. But we recognise that there was consistency in some of these reports that we were producing probably 12-18 months ago, and as a result of that we instigated the bi-monthly meetings that we have with the Programme Management Office, and that's worked really well. So when we do issue a report that has some learning for the Project Management Office, we do share the report with them and we share the findings at these bi-monthly meetings. So that part of it's working really well. And what we also do, so for projects that we've got at the moment around, say Connect, for example, which is the new big system that's been implemented over the next 12 or 18 months, we've got in there early with the project team. So we're involved with that project team at the moment, partly as a sort of assurance piece around user acceptance, testing, data migration, etc. But we can also share directly with that project team some of the lessons that we've picked up over the last 2 or 3 years, and we can feed that back. So we always talk to them about training. Management reporting is another one to think about what management reports you need fairly early on, as is having the right people involved in the user acceptance testing. So we try and also pass on those lessons learned as well directly to the project managers. Is that okay?
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful.
Thank you. Gurinder?
Thank you, Chair. On Appendix 3 and 4, well, particularly 4, Appendix 3, the outstanding recommendation from previous years, 2017-18 and 18-19, a number of them are shown red. And when you look through Appendix 4 and the actual actions, there's particularly for IR 35 and expenses payment stuff, there's a lot of comments there where awaiting management response, and that's been like that for some time. I'm just wondering when this will be, when management response will be available, or what the reason is for the delay.
Yeah, this is some difficulty. They all fall within the same area, within the shared services arena. And whilst we have been chasing the responsible officer, we're just not getting that response through. Now, I should actually point out that the responsible officer in this case has been heavily involved in the response to COVID-19. So that's the reason why we possibly haven't received any update over the last 3 or 4 months. What I can do is go back and ask for a definitive update for the next meeting, or maybe ask the responsible officer to attend to report directly.
Let's do that. Let's ask them to attend, and usually that prompts people to actually then come up with a response.
Yeah, I mean, what we don't do, we continue to follow up on these recommendations until managers either tell us that they're implemented or they are no longer required because they've implemented a new system or process. So they will always be flagged up as red until we make the decision to close them down. I suppose one debate is whether we should stop chasing after a certain time, but then my view on that is we might continue to have that risk. So it might be better to get some closure on those from the manager directly.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the outstanding responses that on the chart, they were due to respond last year, so way before the COVID stuff started. And I think if it's a case of you're not getting consistent response, then we should have a think about what next steps should be. And it would be interesting when these areas. It would be interesting to know when these areas are likely to be reviewed on the internal audit plan again. And maybe that might be something that if you're not getting responses, then actually they have to be, those areas need to be looked at again.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll consider that for the plan.
And we can assist in that acceleration by inviting people to come and explain to us why that happened. Richard, I know you've got some questions about follow up on recommendations, but you might have a different point. Your hand is up, Richard.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd support Belinda handling on both that. I guess as you get used to me, that's one of my cutting buttons to push in terms of implementation of recommendations. I think it was answered. It was just, for me, what's the consequence of non-response or not even replying to one? But I think we've covered that off. Is it okay to ask some other questions? Yep. Okay. Just on page 16 of your report, Lynn, point 9, the data privacy impact assessments. My reading of the response was that it's quite complicated and difficult to do, and I just wondered why that was, because the ICO guidance on DPIAs is pretty helpful and quite detailed. So I just wondered whether that's something you could answer or a colleague.
I think it's possibly the way that the management response is written, to be fair on that one. I think they're quite clear about what is required. The templates are actually in place and they're going through the process of training staff. I think it's just writing it into a detailed policy. Maybe they're giving too much thought to that, and all they simply need to do is refer to the ICO guidance, which is quite clear. So, I'm prepared to go back and feed that back and work with the manager to resolve that issue. I think it's just that maybe we're trying to over-define for the different types of work that's present in the OPCC office, but we can go back and work with the manager to define that, because I think it's just a simple referral that's needed to the ICO guidance. But I'm, quite clear that the templates are in place and that training's there and that's ongoing. It's just the policy that needs to be resolved.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Anyone else wishing to raise any points? No? Okay, thank you very much for that, Lynn. Can we move on then to the item on the risk registers? Mark, are you going to start?
Thank you, Chair. Okay, if I just briefly introduce the position with the PCC's risk register. You can see in the narrative in the report, I've highlighted where risks have changed in terms of their mitigations, and also in part referencing to some scoring as well. The risks, obviously, of COVID have affected the operation of the PCC, as we said already, and the emergency chapter of the Police and Crime Plan has an action plan which supports the delivery of that chapter. So that is that in terms of how COVID's been managed from the PCC's office from an action plan perspective. Some of those actions in terms of the impacts of COVID actually impact on some of the risks as well that are in the risk register in front of you. And I've commented where we have changed and updated the register for those impacts of COVID. The risks overall, in terms of the highest risks, the scores have stayed pretty similar. What we do in the overall risk register, because this just has the top 12 risks, we actually have a sort of target residual score for these risks as well, which we monitor on a regular basis as a management team. Obviously, a significant thing is around resources that we've commented already in terms of the statement of accounts, but some of the narrative has been updated to reflect number 3 on the risk register there around the lack of resources potentially around because of COVID and the impact on resources as general. So that's it for an introduction, Chair.
Okay, let's do them one at a time. So anyone wanting to raise any question or comment on the PCC risk register? Richard, your hand is still up, but I'm not sure if that's a leftover from last time or you've got something to raise.
Yeah, I do. I'm not sure what I'm doing with the technology here. I'm trying to put my hand down when I can.
Right.
Again, just a general point from me. Do we make use of movement analysis? Because we very much described the position as it is at the time of writing the report, but it'd be helpful to know if it's improving or not in terms of what was it like last period. Just wonder whether that was an option.
Chair, that's something we have done in the past, and we can bring that back as a next time to actually highlight the movements. That's easy to do because we do track it. It's just I haven't presented it here in the report.
Yeah, if we can see that next time, it will be useful, I think, for newer members to just get a feel for movement. Kath?
Yes, thank you. My question is about the reference to police recruitment. So we've seen a lot of facts and figures about how many police officers are needed and how many are going through the recruitment process. But I've seen very little on what happens to the officers thereafter and whether the recruitment process is actually identifying the right individuals who can then move on to be supported to become police officers. So it's just really some commentary, Mark, on what happens thereafter, because the risk is not just about recruiting numbers, it's about recruiting the right person as well.
Would you like me to answer that, Chair?
Yes, thank you.
So I think it's a really valid observation, Catherine, but I think probably we're a little bit early yet to say because the officers are starting to come through now. But certainly things like attrition rates are very important to us. Now we track that for the wider force, but clearly the officers coming in at the moment, it's too early to be able to say whether they are going to maintain their careers with us or whether they in fact, won't. We are obviously going through different entry processes as well, so it'll be interesting to see a different variety of recruits that we get compared to what we have done previously with the new PQF way of recruiting and the different courses that the officers go on to. But I think it's probably a little early at the moment to say with the new recruits whether we can safely say that they are the right recruits. We are certainly absolutely tracking the diversity of the recruits in all different strands. So we do understand who is coming into the organisation, but their attrition as yet is something that we haven't yet, because of time, been progressing.
Okay with that, Kath? Okay, Brendan, you wanted to come in?
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Chair. It's really a concern I've got, having read both the risk registers for the force and for the OPCC. And although both of them have a COVID addition to the end of them, I suspect what we're going to find in the next 3 months is that all our assumptions about the way that we would deal with risks relating to recruitment, finances, and so on, a lot of those assumptions are going to change in the light of the scale of the impact of COVID in terms of what's happening to public sector finances, what's happening to GDP, and so on. So it's really the general point that I think between now and the next internal audit meeting, we probably ought to sit down and go through all of the risks on both the forces side and our side, and really stress test them against what we know of what the post or even the intra-COVID normal world that we're about to enter is likely to be, in order that we can genuinely say that the risk register has been properly assessed and refreshed for the full range of implications for COVID.
Yes, thank you. Who wants to pick that up?
I can, Chair. Certainly from a police perspective, I think that's a really valid point. Davinder mentioned earlier that literally this week we have a new strategic director of strategy and risk, and I've already had a conversation with him that we are going to review our processes for the risk register and review every single one. And I think it's a really valid point that when we do that, we take cognizance of this new normal or whatever that's going to look like. So yes, I will definitely do that.
Thank you. So as we've got you on at the moment, did you want to say anything in particular about the force risk register?
I think it's clear there to see that the risks haven't changed from the last period, accepting that the COVID has been entered. I think the only thing I was going to say was that during this next period, this is going to undergo a new review with our new head of risk and strategy. So that was all I was going to mention, unless anybody had any specific questions around any of the risks there. But I think they're quite clear and articulated in a clear way. But we are going to review it.
So I think you need to unmute yourself, Sue.
I do. You're right. My words of wisdom were lost. So no, I'm just checking. Then, does anybody want to raise anything on the force registers specifically? No. Okay. Thank you everyone for everyone's being very succinct and very clear, and we're getting through the business in very good order. So that then is everything on the risk registers, and we've now got the HMIC FRS update. Inspector Shamim Ahmed should be here somewhere. We hand over to you to introduce the paper.
Good afternoon, thank you. So the report's quite light this time around, mainly because HMIC continues with their suspension of all inspection work due to COVID and redeployment of resources into that area. That includes joint inspections, and having said that, it's important to note that the suspension is under review, and it's likely that inspection work will start from autumn onwards. 2 recommendations have been closed since the last report to the committee. Both have been from the National Child Protection Inspection report. First was around the review of detention of children, and the second recommendation was in relation to the multi-agency risk assessment coordination process for safeguarding children. I'd like to point out that in respect of the second recommendation, HMIC is very impressed with the processes that the force has in place and is considering citing that across other forces as good practice. No inspections have taken place since the last report, and the activity on the force management statement is currently under suspension but under review, and it's likely that will be picked up again in the near future. In terms of appeal inspection programme, so this was due to begin in April of this year. However, due to the suspension of all HMIC activity, it's likely that the timeline is going to be revised. I've been told that it's likely that the inspection programme will continue and start in 2021 now. Inspections that have taken place during the last meeting, there's been no inspections that have taken place. However, let me please reassure everyone that the appropriate governance and checks and balances are still in place in relation to any previous activity that HMIC has taken and any recommendations that are in place and that are relevant to the force area. Inspection reports that have been published since the last meeting, there's only been one, and that's the Counterterrorism Policing and Inspection of the Police's Contribution to the Government Prevent Programme report, and that was published on the 9th of March. It's really interesting. This time around, this is the first occasion that HMIC has published one of its counterterrorism policing reports, albeit in a redacted format, which is in the interest of national security. Nonetheless, Prevent is one of the 4 strands of contest, which is the UK's government strategy for counterterrorism. The aim of that inspection programme was to see how forces tackle the cause of radicalisation and support and safeguard those at risk of becoming radicalised. As such, policing is considered a critical role in identifying those people who are vulnerable to radicalisation and referring them to the appropriate support. There were 8 recommendations contained within that report. All have been progressed by the relevant agencies. West Midlands Police Lead is progressing the ones that are relevant to our policing area, and progress is being monitored through the appropriate governance framework.
Thank you very much. I can see that Kath's got her hand up.
Yes, thank you. I don't mean to ambush you with this question, but there was a report done by the HMIC previously around corruption units and corrupt police practices. And I noted within that, they said the recommendations had only been developed or taken on board by 2 police forces in the whole country. It didn't identify them, but I'm hoping West Midlands was one of them. And if they're not, what's the plan for bringing those recommendations to the force?
So if you'd be able to share with me the exact report, I can provide an update to yourself specifically and to other committee members. But if I could reassure you, as soon as HMIC reports are published, that within my team, we identify all recommendations and particularly any that are applicable to police forces and us in general. Those are shared with the force executive team. An appropriate owner is identified, and the appropriate governance framework is identified as well. They're then monitored on a quarterly basis, if not a shorter period of time, and I then link back in with HMIC to identify whether we've done enough to, as a police service, to fulfil our obligations in terms of progressing and completing those recommendations. If HMIC is satisfied, then those recommendations are closed. But I'm happy to take away the name of that report and confirm to the committee that what the force has done in relation to those.
Okay, thank you. I'll send the link through to you for that document then.
Thanks very much, Kath. I can't see any other. Perhaps you could send it to all of us, Kath. I can't see any other hands raised. No one else wanting to come in. Thank you very much then, Shamim, and we'll move on to the insurance update. Janie.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start by saying I think this is going to be the first and only item on the agenda that doesn't mention COVID. And thereafter, just move through the report and introduce the report. It's been quite a challenging year for the insurance programme. Effectively, every single policy was out to tender. It should have just been liability and motor policy, but you will note in the report that the property and assets insurers pulled out of the market 6 months into the 5-year contract. So we had to quite quickly arrange to replace that. Notwithstanding all of the challenges that we've had this year, I think we've come out of the year in a very positive position. You'll note in the report that we've had some overall savings of 384,000 on what we spent last year. If I quickly run through the different headings in the report, the combined liability and motor insurance went out to a full tender. We went into the policy with a £300,000 policy excess on both of those areas of cover. We asked for quotes to take that up to £500,000. I've detailed in the report that we made the decision to go ahead with the £500,000 excess, and in doing that recognise that there were some increased exposure there to the force, but it's so unreliable that we decided to take the guaranteed savings and reinvest them in the insurance fund if we needed to. The considerations around that were the price of the insurance cover, the quality of the cover. We also factored in the developments within the force around the investigation, robust investigation and management of insurance claims, the risk management factors that we've put into place through the force with things like body-worn video, telematics on the motor insurance, the super custody blocks, all that sort of thing. So we placed the insurance with the existing insurers with a £500,000 excess over a 5-year period, and I think the overall saving over the 5 years, if everything stays the same, was 1.3 million. So that was a result on the liability and motor policy. As I've touched upon, the property and assets insurance had to go out again because we effectively had no insurers in the market for renewal in November. We did manage to broker that deal and got the same level of cover with the same rates, some enhancements on cover, so that was another good result. The only other area to perhaps mention is the insurance fund. When it came to committee last year, that was possibly below our exposure. It was a bit short, but we have managed to settle some claims well below what they were anticipated and taken £4 million out of reserves up from the fund. The fund is now on track with about £400,000 surplus for claims that we would call incurred but not yet reported, claims that are yet to come in. The risk management we've put around having that increased exposure of £500,000 is that we will even more tightly monitor developments and reserves on claims so that if we need to, we can top up the fund as and when we know what exposures we've got, rather than make a provision for things we aren't aware of at the moment. So coming out of the year, I think I'm quite happy that it's been a positive year, all things said and done, on the insurance front.
Well, many congratulations. Actually making a saving in the circumstances. I think that's brilliant. Are there any questions on this? Richard, was your question on self-insurance covered elsewhere, or did you want to pick that up?
I think, yeah, just thank you, Janie, for the paper. Again, it's me being new. Just is the decision to kind of self-insure at a higher level from the 300 to the 500, is that a financial decision, or is it driven by something else? So does the claims history kind of direct you that way, or?
We do look at the premium savings, which are obviously a guaranteed saving, as opposed to an unknown developments around claims that we would have. But we wouldn't just look at the financial saving. We would do as best we can. We would look at some claims experience. We would look at claims modelling of sort of what would be as best we could predict the likelihood of catastrophic claims, that sort of thing, really. Oh, hang on a second, my system just gone. So no, it wouldn't just be on the finances. We would have done as best we can, look at what's gone before for West Midlands. We would look at what's gone nationally, both in the police forces, the public sector and the wider insurance sector. So we eventually made the decision that we would take the guaranteed saving, but have a consciousness that we may need to top up the fund as and when we know anything that's coming in, and just really focus on our claims exposure, really. So no, it wasn't just on price. We did tend to look around and see where we were. It was quite a challenge on the motor insurance to decide which way we went, whether we went for we kept the 300,000 on the motor, because the likelihood of motor accidents, that's where your catastrophic claims are more coming from. The value of the insurance claim generally is going up, principally due to people who would previously have not survived are now surviving. Those type of claims carry with them astronomical claim values in terms of care. So we just keep a real close eye on all of that sort of thing, really.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Thank you.
Okay, I can't see any other hands raised. I think it's sort of what Brendan has now. Brendan?
Thanks, Chair. It's really just to make the observation that I think I'm right in saying when we did the investment in telematics business case, we did not include any saving on insurance, or if we did, I don't think it was anywhere near at the level that that's been achieved. So it was really just to highlight the fact that we've probably got here an unexpected saving from some of the IT investment that we did probably 2 years ago. So it's a real credit to how the two bits of the force, the insurance bit and the telematics, have actually delivered a benefit.
Yeah, I think the telematics is part of a wider range of risk management measures that have put the force in a good light in terms of making us more attractive to the insurance market, where they can see that we are dynamic and we're on our game, really. So they are prepared to offer us cover there. I think I should just say as well that where we've got a £500,000 excess on each and every claim, there's what we call a stop loss for the year at 7.1 million, which we should never ever get to, but it does provide us with a safety net. The insurers pitch it so that we should never ever get there. But if we were, then that is our maximum exposure for any one insurance year. So we have got that safety net as well.
Thank you for that. I think that's what other folk have said, that's it's a really good outcome. But watch this space on COVID-19, because anywhere that the insurance companies think they might be at risk from a pandemic, they're going to be popping into policies faster than you can blink. I think going from what the small print in the travel insurance that I take out every year is now saying. But congratulations, Janie, and thanks to you and your team. I think we've completed that item. So we'll move on to the internal audit QA and improvement programs. Back to Lynn.
Thank you, Chair. This quality assurance and improvement programme is a requirement of the public sector internal audit standards, and it sets the basis for the evaluation of internal audit performance and how we drive improvement in our planning. So the report provides an update on the QAIT for 2019-20, and it presents the QAIT for 2021. And as you'll see from the report, as part of our effectiveness review, we've done a self-assessment against the standards that was undertaken in June. And my self-assessment was that I think that we're now fully compliant with the standards. I think we've met all of the requirements that the external assessor pointed out in 2017, and we are now in a good position for the next assessment in October 2022, I think the next one is. I think Appendix B just gives the committee an update on the improvement activities that the team identified themselves as well. They don't necessarily impact on our compliance against the standards. It's about improvements above and beyond the minimum standard requirements. So we've progressed quite well with some of those. Some of them have been a little bit slower on the technology side in terms of upgrading systems, but the system that we're using at the moment is still compliant with the standards, so that doesn't necessarily impact our performance. I think in terms of the analysis against the CRAPE that we've agreed last year, we've conformed with all of that apart from one requirement, which was the annual stakeholder survey that we issue usually around March. So I took the decision late March, early April, in consultation with the chair, not to issue that survey. The timing just didn't seem right because of the COVID response. And as a result of that, I took the opportunity to just reflect on the value of that survey, because as members know, the return rate for that annual survey has always been low in the past. So we've also had to put some caution around the use of the results of that survey. And on doing some analysis, I actually recognised that the respondents to that survey was the same as the respondents to our post-audit questionnaires, which are issued after every audit. And actually the questions were quite similar. So my proposal is to actually abolish the annual survey and just incorporate questions from that into our post-audit survey and issue one survey at the end of every audit, which will be targeted at senior managers. So for that reason, I've taken the requirement for the annual survey out of the CRAPE for next year, but that is the only change that has been made.
Thanks very much, Lynn. So can I just please check, first of all, whether there are any members who have any reservations about that recommendation on the annual survey? It seems to make absolute sense to me. Certainly, this year the timing would have been poor, but if it's the same people replying and we've already asked them the same questions, then actually the immediate response is probably the more valuable. I can see nods, so take that as agreement. Lynn, did anyone want to ask any questions on the paper? Richard?
Yeah, just mindful that kind of COVID has kind of hung over this meeting, and with a glass half full kind of mentality on the basis we should never waste a crisis. Is there anything you want to do different coming out of this in terms of the shape of the team, the skills of the team, the type of work it does?
I think the team have actually adapted really well to the new ways of work, and we all have laptops, we all work from home. Occasionally, obviously more recently, it's been forced upon us a bit more than usual. We are finding workarounds to that. I know other audit teams have started to use tools like IDEA, doing a lot more data and analytics. It doesn't always bode well to some of the records that we're using. So a lot of police records are obviously free text records, and I think data analytics lends itself well to more financial transactions, which we don't tend to do an awful lot of. So I think in terms of that capability, the opportunity is quite limited. But we are looking at alternative ways that we can do audits, and we've adapted quite well to working virtually. Some records which are sensitive, we just couldn't do it virtually. We still have to do those physical site visits. What we have done is change some of our templates to start thinking around, particularly in relation to COVID. So our engagement planning documents, we consider the risks of COVID up front. both from how do we conduct the audit? So can we do it virtually? Do we have to do site visits? Can we do it through Skype with shared screens? And also as a result of how the operational practices may have changed as a result of COVID. So an example might be sex offender management. How has the assessment process changed for sex offender managers who are going into registered sex offenders' homes to do assessments? Have they got the right PPE? Have they changed the assessment process to reduce the risk to them? So a lot of this, we are thinking about the proactive bit up front in terms of the makeup of the team. As you know, we're only a small team, so funding's obviously quite limited across the force and the OPCC. My view is as long as we're covering the high level risks of the organisation, then we can provide that assurance to the organisation in the annual report, and that is my main concern. And at the moment, I think that we have got that membership of the team. There are skills that we're developing, and actually this time has given us the opportunity to explore some training for the teams, because it's been a slow start to the year. So we have enhanced on some training for various members of the team, and we'll continue to look at those opportunities going forward. So it's given us an opportunity, but we've also got some restrictions in how we can use some technology too.
I think I would just comment as the chair of the committee that actually one of Lynn's strengths since she came in as head of internal audit has been the way she's developed her team, and that's both about their personal development but also about ensuring that we've got a team that meets the needs of the organisation. I think that's worked very well. Neil, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick comment really, and basically an offer to Lynn. I think as the force has gone forward at pace around technology and innovation, it's just making sure that her team have the right access, I guess, to some of those skill sets that we might need from them. Just thinking, even in my team in IT&D, we've got app developers now, and we're doing things that we wouldn't dream of doing probably 3 or 4 years ago. And obviously her team are having to keep up that pace as well. So if there's anything we can do to help her as a sort of partnership approach in terms of developing their understanding of the team, then we're really glad to help and support with that.
Thanks for that. Gurinder?
Yeah, I'm just wondering what the longer term looks like, because so there's some arrangements being put in place, people are working from home more, but there are some things. So for example, as board members, we would often come in to do dip sampling of complaints. And how they've been handled and stuff, and now we're not in a position to do that at the moment, but they can only be done by coming in because they were largely paper files that we were looking at. So what does a longer term look like in terms of both in terms of audit but also in terms of operationally? Because if we are moving to a longer term situation where people are working from home more, then how do people make sure that they have access to all the information they need to be able to do the job that needs to be done in the way it needs to be done? Now, I'm not expecting an answer to that today, but I think that's the kind of that's a consideration that has to be there.
That might be something that perhaps we put on to the agenda for the next meeting, just in terms of a sense check in September. Where are we now? How far have things moved? What is the impact? So can we put that on the agenda? Jonathan wants to come in on that.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very brief observation as a corollary to Gurinder's point, and a point I've raised both with Mark as the Chief Finance Officer and with Lynn in her audit role, is that the COVID emergency has required all sorts of new ways of working being adopted very quickly, and it is a culturally different environment as well for things like line management and as well as some more formal process of approvals for decisions, for example. And I guess I would also be asking Lynn and her team to be thinking about what are the additional risks, for example, that we incur from the insider threat or from fraud that arise from the working practices that are necessary in a kind of distributed working environment.
Yes, I think that's a very valid and important point, and no doubt the forward work programme will need to be reassessed in the light of our experience in that. Lynn, did you want to comment?
No, I just agree with what Jonathan just said, really. And part of the reason to change some of our templates is so that we can give some forward thinking around those particular areas as we're approaching audits. And in terms of Gorinda's point, we have had to rejig the plan a little bit. So you can imagine some work that we've got considers very sensitive records. So we are waiting for the right time to go back into the business to check some of those sensitive records that we don't have access to those online. So we have had to be a little bit flexible, but hopefully as recovery progresses, we'll be able to pick up some of those more sensitive audits towards the end of the year.
Thanks very much. Okay, I don't see anyone else wanting to come in on the QA programme. So can you move on then to the annual internal audit annual report, please, Lynn?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Chair. So this really just summarises what the committee has already heard actually throughout the year. It's an annual report, just setting out the work that we've completed throughout the year. So we've completed fully 26 audits, and the higher proportion of those received a positive, reasonable opinion. So that demonstrates a good framework with consistent application of those controls. There was just a couple of audits which the committee received throughout the year where we had the lowest level of assurance, which was minimal, where the framework's considered weaker. But management have put full programmes, improvement programmes in place to address those. Of the recommendations that were made, only 6 of them were rated high. So that's pretty good, and 80% of the recommendations that we followed up throughout the year were implemented. So the control framework is improving all the time as a result of those being implemented. In terms of what we just talked about, the self-assessment for audit demonstrates 100% compliance now, and our effectiveness, 97% of our post-audit questionnaires, the questions within that questionnaire scored good or very good. So we exceeded our target on that particular performance indicator. And as I said, the plan wasn't achieved, but that hasn't affected my ability to give an assurance opinion, because I think we did sufficient work throughout the year. So overall, similar to previous years, that opinion remains as adequate assurance on governance, risk management and control for both organisations.
Thank you very much. As we've commented in the past, since the focus of the audit plan moved to looking at areas where there was greater risk, then it inevitably we're going to be finding more problems. But we are finding them and bringing them forward courageously, which is exactly why this is a valuable service to the force and to the PCC. Kath?
Yes, thank you. Page 6 specifically refers to missing persons and the IT systems. I know we're going to talk about the IT systems a little later on, but regarding missing persons, is the deficiency there around how the initial and the uniform response is made to missing persons, or does it also include locate, which is a team of officers who have got specific responsibility for missing persons?
Sorry, Kath, I will share that report with you because you weren't at the meeting where this was actually discussed. But I think there were sort of the whole system of the missing person processes was impacted in that report. So it was from the point of the call being received to and the assessment of that call, where the initial questions are asked, through to force response and locate. So there was there was issues in the entire framework that we can obviously share that report with you, because as I said, you missed the initial discussion around that. What I will say is the force have got a robust action plan in place around that, and we have conducted a follow-up, which the results are just in draft at the moment, so we can't share that at this stage until that has gone through the final sign-off process. But once that's available to release, we can share that with the committee members. But there were some failings at each stage, some more significant than others.
Right, okay. Well, I'll look forward to reading that then, Lynn. Thank you.
You might want to look at the minute of the meeting as well, Kath, because we did have a very robust discussion with the responsible officer on that.
Okay, thank you.
Richard?
Yeah, just thank you for the report, Lynn. I'm just drawn to page 8 with the KPIs on effectiveness, and just to say, I think that's a really positive outcome. And I know you've already kind of alluded to the fact that you didn't achieve what you wanted to in terms of coverage, but I think 84% in the circumstances of coverage of the audit plan is quite some achievement. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Anyone else?
Chair,
Yes.
just go back on missing persons. As well as the last audit committee, we also had a discussion at the board meeting as well, and a report presented there as well. And there was again a very robust discussion there as well. So I'm pleased to hear that it's been revisited, and look forward to seeing those that report when it comes.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. If there's nothing else then on the annual internal audit report, then we'll move on to external audit and the progress report. And Alex. We can't hear you, Alex. Now I can see you've unmuted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I was saying I've not used Zoom before in this forum and I'll probably get it wrong. And I go ahead and get it wrong, so apologies. In terms of our progress report, standard progress report just sets out where we are in terms of the 1920 audit to date. In there, obviously, we've mentioned COVID, as you expect. We've also, other officers have mentioned that we've started the accounts audit already. We started earlier this week. And that seems to be going so far well. So, but obviously it's all being done remotely. And our experience from auditing the NHS accounts, which we've just finished, was that actually working remotely does add to the time it takes to actually do the audit. So I just flag that up at this stage. Other than that, there's not an awful lot to say in the progress report. Obviously, we refer there to COVID and obviously the potential impact on the accounts. I mean, the officers have already talked about various disclosures they've put in their narrative report and also in the annual governance statements. Obviously, there are areas that we need to focus in as auditors around things like potential changes in the valuation of property, plant and equipment. I won't say PPE because we all think PPE is something else now. And also things like investments, which obviously some of the investment values have dropped off a cliff, and there may also be some issues around the pensions liabilities as well. So there are areas that obviously we'll be focusing in as part of our overall audit. We talk about our audit deliverables as well, and we refer in there, I think it was Mark that mentioned earlier about the fact that the deadline for the actual accounts audits has moved this year. So it was the 31st of July for you to publish your accounts by. That's now moved back to the end of November, and that's been set by MHCLG. Obviously, we won't be working to that deadline because obviously from everybody's perspective, we want to get the audit done as soon as we practically can, because there are potential repercussions for yourselves in terms of doing the budget for the following year. But also, obviously, we don't want to be extending the audit unnecessarily. And that's all I'm going to say in terms of the progress report, but I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Alex. Are there any questions? Can I just pick up, because you mentioned the property revaluations, and I get stressed by this every year, because the Force and the PCC do their valuation in December. There's always a question of how has it moved, and it feels like every year we're doing it twice, or it's sort of duplication of effort. What's the plan this year for ensuring that we're not getting hung up on that?
I don't know whether the finance team want to pick that one up.
Chair, I can comment on that. It's Davinder. So, sorry, just get my video back up again. Yes, so it's not an issue this year because we have had an evaluation done towards the end of the year to report the position as at the 31st of March. So it won't be a problem for this year's accounts. Okay.
Thank you for that. That's a relief. Okay. Does anyone else then have a question for Alex on this? If not, then Alex, can you go on to the addendum to the audit plan and what you're doing on the pandemic?
Absolutely. So obviously we brought our audit plan to the last virtual meeting, and we're required to set out what the significant risks are for the audit during the year. And we identified a number in the last audit plan, fairly standard ones that we bring each year around property, plant and equipment revaluation, pensions liability, etc. Clearly, COVID-19 is also a significant risk, and it's a significant risk at all our public sector entities, be they NHS, local government, police, fire, and we need to kind of just work through actually what that means in terms of, as I've mentioned, in terms of the figures in the accounts, and also potentially, there's been some discussions earlier about going concern. We need to consider whether there's actually any implications around COVID for the going concern assumption, and that's predominantly around things like how you're funded, what your funding is looking like. Obviously, some of that's changing. Some of the announcements have been stalled, etc. So we will need to consider that as part of our the going concern area of the accounts, but also around VFM and when there are any specific VFM issues that we need to think about. So yeah, I've set out there exactly the sort of areas that we'll be covering, and obviously be discussing those with officers during the course of the audit as to what the next steps are and whether there are any concerns. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? I can't see that there are, but obviously there will be lessons to be learned, from how we responded, and what risks were foreseen and what were not. So it will be a valuable piece of work actually, and one hopefully we'll all learn from. And I see nods to that. Thank you very much. Thanks, Alex. Item 16 is the Audit Committee's annual report. Again, I don't want to go through what's in it, but in introducing it, I do just want to give you all my thanks for the way in which this committee works, because the levels of attendance at it are really impressive. It's a committee in which I know in advance everyone who's attending is really engaged in its work. People have very thoroughly read papers and understand the issues that are in front of us. The committee members are persistent if they see something they think needs to be answered, but actually those officers who attend to try and answer questions are always understanding of why this is important, and eager and keen to cooperate with us and answer the questions that we've got. So it really does feel to me that this committee demonstrates why the audit process is important to complex organisations like this, and how you can make it of value. So I thank you everyone who's helped the committee to work in this way. Richard, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Again, just kind of linking this paper back to the annual governance statement. about the committee's own effectiveness. Do we do things like self-assess our own performance and contribution?
We do, we've also assessed what our own learning needs are and thought about our ongoing support needs. Of course, last year we all thought, earlier this year we all thought we were finishing, and that therefore there might be a new committee coming in which would have very different membership and very different needs. So we've been slightly stalled in terms of an ongoing development programme, but we will pick that up again, so that we make good use of the however many months, 10 months, 12 months that we now still have to serve. But we do an annual assessment of how well we're doing. Okay, if there are no other questions or comments on that, then the final item is the work programme. We've all got it hopefully in front of us. Are there any questions on the work programme or any comments anyone wants to make? Brendan?
Thank you. It was really just to ask the question whether, in the light of where we are and the events that were all unpredicted sort of by all of us about 4 months ago, whether we want to change any of the priorities on the forward work plan. And the two that struck me, which might take precedence over others, but obviously it's a matter for others to judge as well, would be looking at my time, which is something that we know has had some difficulties over the last couple of months on its implementation. And the other one is the more the other issue of the management of terrorist post-sentence terrorist offenders, and that's an ongoing issue. And I just wonder whether we ought to just look at those rather than perhaps some of the other issues that are on the work plan. Matter for discussion, obviously.
Thoughts from anyone else?
Sue, can I just come in there? Sorry. I think in terms of Brendan's comments about terrorist offender management, that's due to be done later on in the work plan. Obviously, we'll need to visit establishments for that particular audit, so we were going to plan that later in the year to allow those visits to occur. And also my time, that was a plan. So we'd have to look at resources in order to shift the resources around it if that was to be accommodated. I think it's the audit plan that Brendan's referring to, the internal audit plan, rather than your committee work plan. Yeah,
yes, sorry, yes, that's...
It is, but this is a good place to bring it up.
Yeah.
I mean, perhaps that's something that you could pick up with the officers concerned as in terms of the timing. Clearly, in terms of that first one, as you've said, if you've got to visit establishments, it would be difficult to bring it forward. So
yeah, I think we've actually. I was going to say, I think we've actually got meetings booked in August with the relevant ACC to start preparing for that one, but it might not be completed in time for the September meeting.
So perhaps after you've had the discussions with the ACCs, you could just feed back whether that's resulted in any shift or where it's left them in terms of the timing. Okay. Anyone else have anything they want to ask on the work plan? Okay, so that brings us to the end of the business in the public session. Thank you everyone for your questions and your answers, which have made it a very lively meeting, and we're finishing slightly earlier than we expected. I'm going to suggest that the following meeting we were going to give ourselves a 15-minute break, because we're moving on to a different platform. So if everyone's still comfortable with that, and if we think the other officers who are joining us for the private session will be available. Can we start the part 2 meeting at 3:30? Okay, I'm getting nods. Okay, so we'll have a 15-minute break, and then the private session will begin. Thank you, everyone, and I hope those who've been watching have found it of interest and have been able to follow the discussion. I'll close the meeting.